Well, thanks so much, Steve. I don't know. I think you should have probably given the presentation. That was actually a terrific intro. So, but yeah, I hope you guys had a great lunch. We have the dreaded after lunch session. So I guess our role was twofold. One was to talk a little bit about data, but the other part was to lure you back from lunch by talking a little bit more about food. So thanks for being here. Hopefully we can accomplish both objectives. And thanks again for taking a little bit of time to hear about how we're using data at Food Network. So again, I'm Jonah Spegman, and this is Caryn Canfield. And today we want to just give you a really visual view of how we've been using data at the Food Network to drive our digital advertising efforts. Really over the past year and a half or 2 years, we've increasingly started to move more and more of our marketing efforts through the data-driven filter. I think we're only starting to scratch the surface in terms of what we're able to do with data, but I wanted to share a few things from a recent case study we did for Food Network on Thanksgiving. So just to give you a little bit of background on our group, we're a marketing services group that actually works across Scripps' portfolio of brands. We act kind of like an internal digital agency. We're actually placing and optimizing the media ourselves. I think what's kind of a little bit unique about us is that we're kind of a hybrid between client side working for Scripps, but then also agency side because we're providing marketing services for each of these brands. The major digital advertising channels we're working across are search, display, and email. And on the far left, you can see an example of one of the ads we're in market with for search. And then on the far right, you can see an example of one of the emails that our group would deliver to consumers who had signed up to receive email updates from the Food Network. Really, we have kind of two distinct books of business. The first of which is really more traditional digital advertising, and it's traffic-based campaigns that are really geared around driving qualified audiences to our portfolio of sites. Search has historically been a large part of this book of business, but we're increasingly seeing display and email marketing working their way more into the mix. The second piece, which is arguably the harder piece to measure, but definitely the piece that works more on the brand side of the business, it involves working with the TV marketing teams to promote network awareness and ultimately drive tune-in through digital media. Here's a couple examples of some of the ads we've recently been in market for. Again, the idea is to put the network front and center, but also have a clear call to action, encouraging people exposed to these ads to eventually tune in. The interesting thing about the types of digital advertising that we're doing and being a brand advertiser is that we actually have a hard ROI model behind the types of brand advertising that we're doing. Being that we're a publisher, we're not explicitly selling products. Rather, we're aggregating and delivering valuable audiences to our portfolio of sites so that as the audiences come to our sites, they're exposed to advertising that our own ad sales team is actually selling on the back end. So we're doing a lot with engagement-based marketing, but it's definitely has a hard ROI model behind it. So today, again, I wanted to talk specifically about a Thanksgiving campaign that we recently ran for the Food Network. But before I bring up Caryn to talk you through the actual campaign itself, I wanted to show you a slightly amusing Ecard that we found in preparation for this session that hopefully paints a picture of what consumer mindset might have been around Thanksgiving in relation to the Food Network.
Hey there. So in sitting down with our stakeholders, who in this case were the site team, so again, we're going to focus on hard ROI. Versus just delivering a tune-in message and trying to get that out there as best we can. Three things came to the surface as being the most important. The first being driving Thanksgiving content sampling on foodnetwork.com. With that, we also wanted to reinforce that Food Network is the authority on Thanksgiving and put that out there in the marketplace. And then thirdly, we wanted to drive qualified unique visitors to the Food Network site. So then came the setup. we chose to start this a little bit early, so we chose to do this in 2 phases. First, we looked at the Thanksgiving ramp up into Thanksgiving phase. And this ran from the beginning of November. Can everyone hear me okay? This thing is having a little slide issue on the ribbon. Okay. So anyway, we had 2 phases for this, and the first was leading up into Thanksgiving. And this started at the beginning of November, ran through Thanksgiving, obviously, and then we chose to start a second phase of the flight, which would look at leftovers. Because budgets are not unlimited as much as we would like them to be, we had to kind of be smart about what we were going to do. So then we started to look at the first-party data that we had available to us. Our target audience for this overall was women 25 to 54, but that's such a large bucket of people, and we already have that kind of data on our consumers. So we had to get a little more refined with that. So we looked at the pixeling strategy that we had implemented several months ago, where we went in and we looked at key areas of foodnetwork.com and decided to place pixels across there. So, for example, we've dropped pixels on various different show pages for the network, and then we've also identified key recipe areas. So because of our creative messaging being get Thanksgiving recipes, our search ads, spoke to getting specific types of recipes, and our display creative, which I believe is here, yes. So if you have very good eyes, you can see the search creative up in the top right. And then this message was echoed again in our display creative with the call to action here being get all-star Thanksgiving dishes. And then, of course, anybody who had opted into email was receiving similar messaging around this time. So, based on all of this information, we decided that people who had been to certain recipe pages on foodnetwork.com were our sweet spot. So, just to recap here, I'm going to talk just briefly about some of the learnings that we had from this involving our retargeting strategy, things involving our creative and why we chose to go a certain route with creative, and then also our experiences with some third-party data. Then I'll pass back to Jonah, and he can kind of talk about the BT part of that and how we can make our data actionable. So in thinking about retargeting, again, we did not have unlimited budget here, and so we had to take what our stakeholders gave to us and make it go as far as we can, obviously. So we chose to look at the women 25 to 54. From there, we had to add in the layer of who has been to Food Network and at what point and what content they looked at there. So we saw the importance immediately of selective retargeting and not just blanket retargeting all 60 million cookies that were available to us. And that kind of leads us into the creative life cycle. So the 3 ads on the left-hand side were the pre-Thanksgiving into Thanksgiving part of the creative. So we set this up with the idea being that if you were exposed to one type of food, then you wouldn't see it again if you responded to the creative. We didn't want to get so bogged down in looking at data and numbers that we forgot to be marketers at the end of the day and wore people out with the same pumpkin pie ad over and over and over again. But that served a second purpose, which was to set us up for phase 2 of the campaign. So we used those ads actually to collect even more data on our consumers. So as they were out there clicking, we were amassing a cookie pool that we could serve leftovers banners to. The thinking here was that after Thanksgiving, people are going to be so over looking at pie and turkey and mashed potatoes that they're probably not going to be receptive to that. So any competitors that are out there in the marketplace with an unrelevant message, this would resonate a little bit more with potential consumers. And then, also it would take advantage of any times when competitors may not be running, and we could use those last few days of the month to drive back to our site and help our traffic. So a couple of other things that we looked at here, we're looking at just third-party data on its own. We did go out and purchase some data. Things like people in market for kitchen appliances. We chose to flight that on its own just to see what it would do. Turns out that wasn't actually a very good idea for us. Didn't pan out. We weren't getting the type of response rates that we were looking for. So we took that and layered it with our own data. Now that was a winner. Turns out just targeting people who want small kitchen appliances is far too broad. We were looking to do something pretty refined and precise. So when you are asking someone to come to the site and download a recipe and look at recipe content, we had to hit them. We had to find them where they were. And then something that we just kind of refer to as conscientious prospecting works really well. A secondary goal for this was to, of course, increase the unique count for foodnetwork.com through the month of November. So we did that by building an audience of anybody who had been to the site within 30 days and then purposefully excluding them so that we could go out and re-engage people who maybe haven't been back to the site, just remind them that, hey, Food Network's out here to provide you with recipe content, but then just to go after people who might be true unique visitors and never been exposed to the great kind of content that's on Food Network. Here you go.
So Caryn talked to you a little bit about how she was using BT via retargeting for our display ads, but one of the things we wanted to bring up, not directly related to the Thanksgiving campaign, but still I think relevant to the data discussion, was that BT is working for us beyond just display. And so one of the ways this is actually working for us quite well is through leveraging Food Network's email database. And so Food Network has a large email database of millions of consumers who at one point have signed up to receive email messages from Food Network. These messages range anything from a daily email reminder about a new recipe to a monthly or weekly digest of what's happening on site or what's happening on the network. And so what we did is we parsed through, in our email systems, we parsed through about 3 months worth of behavioral data. And what we did is we were able to identify users who explicitly clicked on any content related to Paula Deen. That could have been a picture of Paula Deen, it could have been a recipe of Paula Deen's, it could have been a Paula Deen cookbook. And we were able to segment those users. There's about 60,000 of them. And what we did is we sent them an email message that is typically one of our worst performing messages. It's a tune-in push message that is encouraging users on the day of a premiere to watch an episode. And so here's an example of, actually here's the actual creative that was run. And it was basically promoting Paula Deen's guest appearance on HGTV Design Star. And what we saw through leveraging the BT in our email database is that we were able to drive a 3 times average open rate and actively able to drive users to interact with the email and hopefully tune in on the back end. So it was a good use case for us that behavioral targeting can work beyond just display. We're also seeing it actively work through email and also on site. The last point we really wanted to drive home in terms of what we learned over the past year or so with data is that with so much data coming in, and some of the panels earlier today really kind of alluded to data overload, we've tried to put every bit of data we're getting back through an actionable filter. So that could be campaign results data or consumer insights that our research group is passing our way. I think having it be actionable and directly ready to apply to our ad campaigns has really been a best practice we've learned over the past couple months. So the first example is an example using SEO and paid search keywords. And we made a large investment in some SEO software that basically allowed us to track and see how our competitors ranked for keyword terms that were related to our category. So an example of this might be inputting a term like turkey recipes, and the software would tell us, hey, competitor number 1 has the #1 organic ranking spot for this. Competitor number 2 has the 2nd spot for this. Food Network is in the 3rd spot for this. So it gave us some great competitive data, but it wasn't really actionable data. It was actionable, but there was so much of it that we couldn't apply it in sort of a mass scale. So what we did in prep for the Thanksgiving campaign is we actually migrated this SEO competitive data directly into our bid management platform, so that as our search analysts were actively working on the Thanksgiving campaign, they could see ranked competitive sets of what our competition was doing and how they were ranking for those terms. That would allow them to add, drop, or bid up certain terms that were maybe not terms that we were ranking well organically for. And so what we found at the end of this is that while we were paying a premium on those SEO-related keywords that we didn't necessarily rank well for, the ROI model really held out because traffic and audience driven against those keywords was potentially traffic that was new to the network. And it allowed us also to sort of conquest against what our competition was doing during the same time frame. The second example is an example of a chart that I think the person who talked this morning his skin would have crawled if he saw this. But it was it's a chart that sort of summarizes the campaign results data from our DSP. And at first we looked at this and didn't really understand quite what it was or how it was actionable. But after sort of walking through it and really sort of understanding the story behind this chart, we were able to pull away some sort of valuable insights. And what the chart looks at is how users were interacting with our banners during the Thanksgiving campaign. And it splits it out by day of week on the bottom and then time of day. And what we found is that early on in the week, people exposed to our ads just weren't interacting with them. And we saw this similar trend on site as well. And what we really chalked it up to is that users are coming back from the weekend, people are coming back from the weekend, don't necessarily have as much time to consume recipe and meal preparation related content. So as we went later into the week, we sort of found that users both on site and in interacting with our ads were much more engaged with them. And what we found is that actually Saturday and Sunday between the hours of 2 and 6 p.m. are the hotspots for when users are actively in sort of search mode for what to make for dinner. So we're able to see this trend fairly early on in the campaign and then actively weight media towards the back end of the week so that we were there during key times when users were primarily most interested in searching for recipe content online. So 2 examples of how we tried to make data actionable for the Thanksgiving campaign. So in summary, Caryn's told you a little bit about how we're using selective retargeting and the importance of not just blanket retargeting everybody who we've had previous interactions with. She told you a lot about the creative life cycle and sort of the challenges around not losing sight of how important creative is when you're so deep in data. We talked to you a little bit about our experiences with third-party data, and that our experience has been first-party data is always the most effective, but it can be further enhanced and amplified by what we can rent through third-party data. And then finally, I told you 2 examples of how we made data actionable and how we use BT beyond display. So this would be an absolutely terrible case study if we didn't have any sort of hard numbers for you guys to look at. So this next screen sort of gives the results of the Thanksgiving campaign. And I think the high points, and it may be a little bit difficult to see, are that we're able to serve 86 million targeted impressions to that women 25 to 54 audience, particularly impressions that were BT targeted. We directed just shy of 2 million clicks to the site and 16 million page views. So we were able to run a brand campaign but still achieve ROI on the back end from advertisements that were sold on our own sites. So that is what we did with Thanksgiving for Food Network. Would love to open it up to any sort of questions now.
Since our last panel was on attribution, how did you connect this campaign to the actual tune-ins, distinguish from previous campaigns, and attribute credit to this campaign?
You know, we use a lot of micro conversions to really draw the dotted line between what we're doing in digital advertising and how we're encouraging tune-in. So a lot of what we'll look at when we're running digital media campaigns are on-site activity. So if we can get users into key areas in the site where they're consuming a lot of promo content, if we can get their email address, we look at all those as sort of micro conversions for at least showing that they're interested in the show. If we get their email, then hopefully we can send them a tune-in reminder really close to the show. So we're not able to draw a hard line between digital advertising and tune-in, but there's definitely micro conversions along the way that sort of point us in the right direction.
I was curious about scale, especially when you mentioned having to sort of dispense with using third-party only, which I imagine part of that the aim there was also to achieve greater scale than simply using your own base. what did you struggle with getting scale when you started needing to work with blending first and third party data? Was that one of the challenges? Did you hit your targets?
Yes, we did hit. Yeah, we were able to hit our targets with respect to that. It actually, I think, was a little bit easier for us in terms of like looking at the limited budget that we were working with. It was a lot easier for us to kind of optimize towards placements that were working really well for us. But you know, buying the third-party data for other campaigns, it's worked. It's just for this, it wasn't relevant enough to the actual person that we wanted to go after.
So relevancy was really the key differentiator.
Absolutely.
So third-party data does work in other cases, but not for this.
Sure. And it just, I think, works better when you can put your own data with it.
Caryn, Jonah, thank you very much.